The Iron Throne is the most iconic symbol of George R. R. Martin's magnum opus, A Song of Ice and Fire. It is the titular throne in the title A Game of Thrones and Game of Thrones of the first book and the HBO adaptation, respectively. It's the thousand blades of Aegon the Conqueror's enemies, made molten and forged together into a singular seat by his dragon, Balerion the Black Dread, very much acting as representation of his conquest of Westeros in and of itself. With that said, much and more has been attributed to this throne over the years. Not only is it a tremendous seat of power from which this entire continent is ruled, but there are several instances where it seems as though the throne is being attributed a mind of its own, where it is marking those it views as unworthy and even potentially striking down individuals in their prime. Today, I'm going to discuss the throne itself and all of the lore that goes along with it, and assess whether or not it is actually cursed, as many commoners of Westeros seem to think. I should also clarify, I'm talking about the big chair what from Game of Thrones, not the stupid underwater mission from Baldur's Gate 3, which is one of my least favorite parts of an otherwise excellent game. The Iron Throne in the television show is very different than its literary counterpart, as I'm sure you know if you know anything about the books versus the show, in that it's a lot smaller on the show and it's a lot kind of more compact in its construction, in that it is just a seat. You can sit down, you can do whatever. In the books, not only is it a massive behemoth with these stairs made of blades you need to climb to even reach it, but the back of the seat itself is still blades. You cannot lean back on this seat, as Aegon the Conqueror specifically designed this seat to be uncomfortable. He says someone who wears the crown should never sit comfortably, and this seat was designed to act as a representation of that for whatever rulers were going to follow Aegon in his rule. Additionally, this is a very exclusive seat. As far as we know, very few people have sat on it, as the only individuals who are permitted to do so are the King of Westeros and his hand, and there haven't been a ton of those over the years. At the current point in the series, as of the end of A Dance with Dragons, even the king himself is not allowed to sit the Iron Throne. Tommen Baratheon is only 8 years old, and in addition to not being the rightful king, his mom is worried that he's going to injure himself if he sits on the sword chair, which is not unfair for an 8-year-old. In fact, if we're looking at the entirety of both Westeros and Essos, there are only two living individuals who have sat the Iron Throne, and neither of which have done so as a full ruler necessarily. Jaime Lannister sat upon it after killing Aerys II Targaryen after becoming the Kingslayer, and Tyrion Lannister actually sits on it in the book. That doesn't happen in the show, but while he's ruling in Joffrey's stead in A Clash of Kings as acting Hand of the King, he does hold audience from that chamber, and it's a nice moment where he gets to kind of feel this power for a very brief and rare instance. But other than those two individuals, nobody living has sat on the Iron Throne. Connington might have, but given the fact that he was a wartime hand who was actively commanding from the field, it seems pretty unlikely that that came to pass. The Iron Throne seems to take on a life of its own in certain legends. We see one of these on display in House of the Dragon, though notably changed from the books. So Viserys the First Targaryen, in the premiere episode of House of the Dragon, cuts one of his fingers on the Iron Throne. He later loses those fingers, his hand, his arm, all of it, just very gradually, and he seems to have this leprosy that seems to be, if anything, originating from this disease or from the wounds he is taking from the throne. We also see a cut on his back during that episode, which is supposedly from the throne as well. In the book, that's quite different. He ends up tripping and falling onto the throne much later in 126 AC, as opposed to the premiere of House of the Dragon, which I believe takes place around 110, 112 AC. But in this instance, it's not an infection so much as it is just a pretty grievous injury, and it is only healed when Rhaenyra's dragon stone maester comes and heals his hand by amputating two of his fingers. So he does lose the fingers, just in a fairly different way. In both instances, it seems as though Viserys is really not keeping that great a hold on things, and because of that, he is injured by the throne on which he sits. We know of a few other examples of the throne making its will known on those who sit upon it, one of which I won't mention for the sake of House of the Dragon spoilers, as I'm sure that's coming up in the near future. But additionally, Aegon II Targaryen had so many cuts from the Iron Throne that at a point he was known as King Scab, as he was just covered with these wounds from the throne itself. It's unclear whether or not this happened to more kings. There were certainly other unworthy kings throughout the time of the Targaryen dynasty, most notably Aegon IV, IV, but we really don't know a ton about him or his reign because a lot of that is being saved for Blood and Fire, the sequel to Fire and Blood, upon which House of the Dragon is based. So it's unclear as to exactly what might have happened during that era. If I were a betting man, I would say that Aegon IV probably got a few scrapes and scratches from the throne as well. Oh, also, Joffrey cuts his arm on the Iron Throne in A Clash of Kings. I forgot about that. Clash is probably the book I've reread the least. I do think they should have adapted that in the show as well, because I think that it would have made sense with Joffrey's character in both instances, but I digress. The biggest example of the throne supposedly inflicting its will on the ruler that sits upon it is the death of King Maegor the Cruel. Maegor was the third king of Westeros, the second-born son of Aegon the Conqueror, and he was not great. He killed a bunch of people. He started wars against both his family and the Faith. The war against the Faith ended up helping the Targaryen dynasty in the long run, but his wars against his nephews specifically were not great. It was very Hamlet vibes at a point. But towards the end of this series of wars where Maegor has very much fallen from grace, he is someone who is very much on his way out of power and figuring out how exactly to get out of this. He's even considering taking the Black. He's getting counsel from a number of different individuals. Others are abandoning him. And he has this last night alone in the throne room where he's considering his options. In the morning, one of his 6 wives, he had 6 wives, comes in and finds him dead upon the Iron Throne, his arms slashed open. It is unclear exactly what happened there. Commoners, of course, say, oh, the Iron Throne saw this cruel King Maegor and struck him down. Others say he was killed by one of his constituents. Others still say he took his own life. It's unclear exactly what happened here, but it is a mysterious event that has always held my fascination in the history of Ice and Fire. It very much makes sense that the common people of Westeros might think of the Iron Throne in and of itself as a curse. It is made from the swords of the foes defeated by Aegon Targaryen, not foes defeated in battle, sword to sword, cavalry to cavalry, ground forces to ground forces, but swords that were thrown at his feet in the wake of this massive dragon that later melted them into a singular seat of power that the people of Westeros don't necessarily want, but do kind of have to deal with. Additionally, I think there are other elements at play as well. Martin himself has talked a lot about the Iron Throne. Actually, one of his earliest blog posts where he is discussing differences between the show and the books in maybe a negative light deals with the Iron Throne itself. And he specifically mentions it as a symbol of conquest. The words Martin uses to describe the Iron Throne signal its role in the narrative. Massive, ugly, asymmetric, a throne made by blacksmiths hammering together half-melted, broken, twisted swords, wrenched from the hands of dead men or yielded up by defeated foes. It is a symbol of conquest. Not only that, a symbol of conquest in universe, it is sort of a metaphor for what conquest is in general. It's massive. It's these countries growing out of proportion to what they can really sustain. It's asymmetric. These different regions that have never been united under a single banner and now brought together and forced to live under the same laws. And it's ugly. It creates a lot of just death surrounding it. Either individuals have to surrender and yield to it, or they have to die fighting against it or with it. The last section of Martin's blog post describing the Iron Throne and this illustration of it is a look upon Aegon's works, ye mighty, and despair. This is obviously a reference to a very famous episode of Breaking Bad, which I don't think it actually aired by the time this post was posted, but also the poem Ozymandias, that being this old king who has created this statue saying, look on all of my works and just see how amazing they are, but they're all gone. Nothing beside remains around that colossal wreck. It's an excellent poem, and I think it does very much speak to Aegon's legacy as what is truly left by the time the main series starts. The throne remains, yes, but his dynasty is dead, the few survivors scattered, and nothing beside remains. I think that is the core role of the Iron Throne. I think it is meant to be an embodiment of this system of power that has been inflicted on Westeros. It is big, it is ugly, it is made by force and melted in dragon fire. Additionally, I think that the elements of the curse, supposedly, that are kind of whispered about by the common folk, kind of breathe life into this idea of it being a metaphor for the negatives, the Targaryens, as it is seen as maybe inflicting justice on the worst of the Targaryens. So it's kind of the empire stabilizing itself. I don't think that there is any inherent magic in the Iron Throne. We have heard of some magic revolving around dragon fire and steel, specifically the forging of Valyrian steel, but given that we don't hear of any spells being worked, it's quite unlikely that it was very much imbued with any sort of magic. If anything, might have been the Red Keep, might have been, but the throne itself predates that, and it predates the workers that Maegor killed after they completed the construction of his grand castle. The ghosts of those who gave up these swords were likely not happy about it, but there's no concrete evidence that they linger in this seat. The series finale of Game of Thrones was entitled The Iron Throne and featured the titular seat's destruction by Drogon's fire. While that episode is terrible and I hate it, I don't entirely hate the idea of one of the final actions of the series being the destruction of this empire and this symbol that represents it that has ruled over Westeros for now 300 years. Yes, the Targaryen dynasty has done some good. Jaehaerys built roads. Aegon V ended up implementing certain reforms that benefited peasants. But overall, this is something the people of Westeros did not ask for, inflicted upon them by this draconic magic. And to see it undone by that same hand would be quite excellent in terms of the overall narrative arc of Ice and Fire. In the end, I think that Viserys the First Targaryen from House of the Dragon acts as the best true representation of what the curse of the Iron Throne really is. That the power this seat bestows on those who sit it is often enough to crush an individual under their own weight. And it being a chair made of swords also lends itself to some cutting people accidentally. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it, and it does really help grow the channel. I'll have many more videos on A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, Dunk and Egg, House of the Dragon in the very near future, and I hope you'll stick around for all of those, because they're very fun to make, and I just enjoy seeing that people enjoy them. I have many things coming up. Tyrion video that I'm working on, it's taking a little longer than I expected, in that rereading has become a little more difficult now that law school has started again, but I'm persevering. It will be out soon. Goodbye, everyone.